Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now this week we've got a little bit of news, a very, as far as I'm concerned at least, exciting announcement. And then we are going to be looking through what I call the hidden gems from Roaring Skies. They're not really hidden gems. What they are is non-EX, non-trainer cards, which, non-EX Pokemon essentially, which I think are quite interesting and worth taking a slightly longer look at. And the kind of format we're in at the moment, the reality of it is that a lot of the time, it's really EXs and trainers we're excited about, and pretty much everything else in the last couple of years really has been intermittent. We have the odd card which is good, but they tend to be more like hidden gems. We've got a few exciting ones to have a chat about, so we'll get to that. Starting off with the exciting announcement, at least as far as I'm concerned, it looks very likely at this stage, not 100% confirmed, but very likely, enough that I'm willing to talk about it, that I will not be playing at UK Nationals this year. On the one hand, this makes me very sad. I've played at every UK National since 2011. On the other hand, it's because I'm going to be kind of presenting / commentating. This will include picking and feature matches to go off on the stream, i.e. I'm going to make sure we got good players and good matchups. None of this random people selected at random malarkey because they happen to fall on a particular table, and hopefully commentating on the UK National stream, assuming that the technical stuff all works out quite nicely. Although on the downside, it looks like the overall regional stream has been lost, which does make me very, very sad. And various kind of other little jobs within the within UK Nationals itself. So to UK listeners, you're going to be able to see me kind of running around at Nationals, finding who's in the feature matches and all that kind of stuff, doing a few announcements, getting me vocal cords all warmed up. And for anyone not in the UK, you really should be watching the UK National stream. As we get closer, I'm going to give you as much information as I can. Check my Twitter if nothing else, as we get to the weekend of UK Nationals, which is the last weekend in May. I believe it was the 29th and 30th. I'll give you all the details, and then you can watch UK Nationals with me commentating as we stream. It should be a gay old time for everyone involved. It should be wonderful indeed. So yeah, not playing Nationals this year, but this could be a little bit more exciting. Plus, by working at Nationals, I get essentially paid in Roaring Skies, and Roaring Skies has shame in him. Life is good. So going on to new cards, we have some not very exciting new cards. The Trainer Kit, this is it's quite a cool set for teaching new players. You essentially get two 30-card decks, which could be combined into a 60-card deck if you wanted to play with someone else who had their own deck. But they essentially work as two decks, and they teach you about weakness and all of that. And it allows you to kind of play a few turns scripted with the aid of a little book if you set the decks up in the right order, to kind of demonstrate some of the key concepts to new players. And in there, you're going to be able to get an exclusive Latios and Latias. And you get holo and non-holo in the set, the only exclusive cards in there. Now, if you're fans of Latios and Latias, as always, I highly recommend you kind of pick these up for collecting purposes. Honestly, the cards themselves suck. Latios can do 40 damage for a double colourless, unless you flip a tails, in which case it does nothing. And 70 damage for 2 psychic and a colourless. That sucks. Latias can do 20 for 1 psychic energy, which is, just look at anything like Deoxys, Latios EX, etc. that are just plain better. And it can do Psychic Prism for a Psychic double colourless, 60 damage. On a coin flip, it goes up to 80 damage. Those cards are not good. Do not waste your time on them. Now, over the last few weeks, I've been telling you about the Gym Challenge promos. These are basically coming out these are if you go to particular gym challenges in Japan, you can get particular promo cards for going there. And we've talked about some of these. We've talked about Tyrantrum EX. There's a rare candy coming, all of that. We've also talked about the Jirachi, which potentially could be a Seismitoad counter, at least of a certain magnitude. Now we have some other cards to talk about. Two, really, which are worth going into. Firstly, Heavy Boots. You attach it to your Pokemon, its retreat cost is 3 colourless more, and its max HP is increased by 20. But, Eviolite is still in the format, so... And Hard Charm. I think Eviolite might have rotated, but Hard Charm's still in the format. And honestly, the Hard Charm's better because it takes 20 off everything. Now, the one thing it is good for, and this goes back to if you were playing, at the time, the Giant Cape versus Eviolite at the time. Now it's Heavy Boots versus Hard Charm. This is good, for instance, for Poison. Poison is unaffected by your Eviolite because it's just kind of doing the damage, whereas this actually adds 20 HP, which will, of course, count if it's there for Poison. Nobody's really playing Hard Charm at the moment, and the retreat cost can be a pain. Well, you can always play something like Caldeo or a bunch of Switch. I just don't particularly like it. Most decks are still running Muscle Band because that card is amazing. Cool in theory, nice little card. It's not going to be particularly good for anything. And the other card which caught my eye is Malamar. Malamar seems to be one of those Pokemon, kind of like Gengar and Pyroar, where every time it's released, it's interesting. So, it has got an ability, and for life of me, I've forgotten my Greek letters today, but it's Stop, and it's prevent any effects of your opponent's Pokemon abilities done to this Pokemon. So, for instance, Pyroar couldn't bring it off the bench. Crawdaunt couldn't get rid of its energy. So, any abilities which would affect the particular Pokemon, it doesn't affect. It is a new kind of... it's Theta, sorry. Theta was the one I was looking for. So it's Theta Stop. And it's a new type of ancient trait we haven't seen before. And it's kind of cool. We're not really that high on abilities at the moment. They tend to affect our side of the board more than our opponents. But could be very, very useful in the future. And we're judging by, the way we've seen it, it's likely that in the next set there's going to be some more Theta Stop Pokemon coming out. Now, the ability is called Amanojaku, which is, of course, not how it's actually pronounced, but it's the best I'm going to make today. So it's got an ancient trait, it's also got an ability, and the ability reads, as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, during your opponent's next turn, treat all coins he or she flips as tails. Now, this is very, very interesting to me. It doesn't just say for the attack. Now, again, this is... I'm going on PokeBeach.com here, as I tend to do. New website, unsure if I like the design. I'm sure I'll get used to it in the long run. What do you guys think? Hit me up on Twitter, @TheWassy. Tell me what you think of the new PokeBeach layout. I think it's going to be better when I'm used to it. I'm not loving it at the moment, but I don't like change. It certainly is quite intuitive, I'll give it that. So, let's say, for instance, you're playing against a Seismitoad deck. Every Super Scoop Up, every Laser, every Crushing Hammer is coming out as tails. That's pretty useful. Not to mention that attacks with coin flips kind of come and go in the format, but it's still kind of useful. Ironically, it's a brilliant counter against Malamar EX, it being Malamar. So it's kind of useful, and like I say, the current translation we have is that it's all coin flips, not just for attacks. We'll see if that's the way it is in fact translated, but I tend to trust PokeBeach because the other one that translates them is Bulbapedia, but there were a couple of disagreements, including whether Dragonite EX, when it went up in PokeBeach read basic energy, Bulbapedia read all energy, and it's kind of come up that essentially... PokeBeach was right, so I tend to believe PokeBeach. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go through all the non-EX Pokemon in the set, and, we're going to go through all the interesting non-EX Pokemon in the set. I'm going to tell you my thoughts or what I've heard from other people. Again, if you want to go back to my initial thoughts, I did do a podcast about this when Emerald Break, as it was called in Japan, was released in Japan. This is my second look, my look with hindsight, etc. So, go back if you want to see my initial impressions, but this is having had time to think about it, having seen other people's opinions of these cards. So, we'll have a look to see if they're better or worse than we thought initially. So starting off with grass, there are some interesting Pokemon here. We've got Executor, which for 1 grass energy does 20 damage times the number of colourless Pokemon your opponent has in play. And of course, Shaman is going to be everywhere, as is Rayquaza. And Rayquaza decks are going to be essentially all colourless unless they go ahead and play Execute, which, as we've previously mentioned, it's useful for Propagate filling your bench. Especially, when your stadium's knocked out and you need to fill your bench up to 8 quite quickly. But it's also incredibly dodgy in terms of being killed. So even, it's a nice little attack, especially if you're playing Executor. It would fit quite nicely as a one-off. Now, there is a Beautifly there with an ability Miraculous Scales, which it's kind of like a rubbish safeguard. It doesn't prevent all effects of attacks done by EXs, but it does prevent all damage done. So you could still poison or confuse, etc. Beautifly with an EX. It's got one attack, 80 for a grass double colourless, and you can make your opponent switch their active. So it's not brilliant. Although the Wurmple from which it evolves has a fun little attack called Flock for a grass energy, which allows you to pop a second Wurmple on your bench. And remember that if it's popped onto your bench with an attack, it is ready to evolve next turn. Still not going to be great, unfortunately. Now, there is a Dustox with Delta Plus. That is the ancient trait which allows you to take an extra prize card if you KO with that Pokemon. And it's kind of funky in that it can do 20 damage for just one energy, or it can do 50 to the bench for a grass double colourless. It's still at stage 2, it needs grass energy, and the good attack takes free energy. But it's, it's useful for a deck if you can just bring it in and attack with it. When I went through these with the Japanese, I actually went through them ancient trait by ancient trait. So if you want to go back to that one and have a look, I go through all the Delta Plus in one go. Now, there is an Jask which I like, but I'm a little bit... I don't know, I'm a little bit confused, shall we say. Not confused as to what it does, but just confused as to whether I like it or not. Now, if this worked on the bench, I would love this card. So, the attack's garbage, but the ability allows you, once per turn, if it's in your active, you can discard a card from your hand. If so, you can discard the top card of your opponent's deck. Now, we all know with Lissandra's trump card that mill decks are essentially gone now. Mill decks are just a waste of time. But, especially with VS Seeker as well, because you can't just kind of hope to mill their one Lissandra's trump card. They're going to get it back with VS Seeker. So you're not going to try and win with milling, but it's just a really fun little disruption. And let's not forget, Dark decks might want to get Dark Energy in the discard. Flareon decks want to get Pokemon in the discard. Anything relying on Archies to get an Empoleon or any other Stage 1 or Stage 2 out as a basic is going to want to put stuff in the discard. Any Metal decks want to put Metal Energy in the discard. And the game has for a long time, and I'm assuming will continue to, have decks which revolve around, playing from the discard pile, having cards in the discard and working them from there. So it's a cool little card which just allows you to discard a card from your hand without having to have an Ultra Ball or a computer search or something like that. That alone is good. The fact that your opponent has to discard a card from the top of his deck, like I've said, it's not going to be the kind of card which, it's not going to kill your opponent with milling. But what it is going to do is it's going to essentially force your opponent into some awkward discards, and that's kind of fun. It's fun to... It's just fun to be able to discard your opponent's cards. Maybe you get lucky. Maybe you end up making them discard one of their DCEs or their tech Pokemon or whatever. It really is quite funky and fun. Now, one of the most interesting cards is Shedinja, and this is one that, and I think I might have done this the first time round on the podcast, I really didn't see it for as much as it could be. It really is quite interesting. So... one attack's garbage, but it's got an attack for a colourless energy, so you can just do a 1-1 line of this. This attack does 50 damage times the number of damage counters on this Pokemon. Alright. Well, he's got 30 HP, so that's 100. However, this is where that heavy boot, or whatever it's called, card that I just mentioned comes in, why you would play that over Hard Charm here. Shedinja now has 50 HP. If he's got 40 damage on him, now you're doing 200 damage. And let's not forget Muscle Band, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's also remember that Wally allows you to get Shedinja going on turn 1. So... how do you get damage on Shedinja? You use Rainbow Energy, that's 10 damage. You use Frozen City, that's 30 damage. Hang on a second. You've now got 30 damage on your Shedinja. Now, he dated. So you really you need to be careful here. But like I say, you can use something like, this heavy boot card. You can evolve them up with Wally. Now you've got 30 damage on your Pokemon. And you're doing 150 damage. Now, no Muscle Band there, of course, because you've had to use, you've had to use your, I'm thinking of the word here, your tool in order to actually increase its HP. But this isn't actually how you do it. I mean, you can, don't get me wrong, but this isn't the main way to do it. And what people pointed out to me is Mew EX. Now, Mew EX, for those that have forgotten, can copy the attacks of essentially any Pokemon in play, as long as you've got the energy. Yeah, Giant Cape, I believe, has rotated out. If I remember correctly, it was in Dragons Exalted, not reprinted. But like I say, you've got this boot thing coming out, which will allow you to do up to 200 damage with Shedinja. But like I've said, let's assume you've got a Mew. Now you can use the Frozen City combo with Rainbow Energy, and you're doing 30 damage to your own Pokemon, 20 damage when you attach to a non-Plasma Pokemon with Frozen City out, and 10 damage when you attach a Rainbow Energy. Now Mew's doing 150, and now you can get going with, for instance, a Muscle Band to go up to 170, or a Laser to go up to 180, no Verbank of course, because you've had to use Frozen City. So you wouldn't really attack with Shedinja. Here you are attacking with Mew, and it's a fun little idea. Now it's quite a lot to ask for, but if you can go for Nincada, Wally into Shedinja, and then you can go Mew, Rainbow Energy, Muscle Band, Frozen City, although you'd obviously need to Frozen City out before the Rainbow Energy, you can be doing 170 on turn 1 of the game for 1 energy. That's pretty funky. It's a fun little deck. Shedinja is one who, he's on my radar, shall we say. Now, you have got to have a 40 HP basic, and we all know that Latios or Latias EX, we'll get to it later, can do 40 for 1 energy on the first turn of the game. That's a problem. It doesn't get Laser Donked, because Laser Verbank only does 30, but it ain't going to last very long. And, you know, do you really want to be relying on 120 HP EX Pokemon, which gives up 2 prizes? Now, the answer is, well, hang on a second, if I can do 180 damage for 1 energy every turn, I don't really care if you're knocking out my Mew. So something to bear in mind. Certainly very, very interesting. Now, honestly, going through fire, there is nothing that catches my eye. Going through water, there's an Articuno that also has Delta Plus, which allows you to take an extra prize card if you take a KO with Articuno. But the only attack it's got, although it's a basic, which gives it a bonus over Dustox, it attacks for 2 water and a colourless. It can do Sleep for a water, but you're not going to get a KO with Sleep. And it does 20 damage, flip 3 coins, 40 more for each head. So it maxes out at 140, but no. The whole point of using these Delta Plus Pokemon is twofold. Either you're one-hit KOing, think, although it's not a Delta Plus Pokemon, same theory, think Lugia EX in the old Plasma decks, or if you're Dan Middleton, the current Plasma decks, or you're just, you know, going to get the KO, to get the last little bit of energy, last little bit of damage with it, which is why doing 20 for 1 energy with Dustox is a good plan, except for it's a Stage 2, and why Articuno is, in fact, not a good plan. And it makes me a little bit sad, ladies and gentlemen, but hey-ho, what can you do? There is an Electrode going into Lightning, and Lightning, again, is fairly slim pickings, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. There's an Electrode, which has got interesting attacks. For a colourless energy, you can do 20 times the amount of heads you can hit in a row, flip until you get tails, 20 for the number of heads, which, if you're feeling lucky, could be funky, although I hate the artwork on that, incidentally. And it's for a Lightning double colours, you can do 70 damage and move all the energy from this Pokemon to your bench in any way that you like. Redistributing energy is good. We've seen that all the way through. I mean, one prominent example of that would be, for instance, looking at the Tornadus, which was used in CMT decks for a while, but certainly not particularly good. And I really don't like anything else in Lightning. I don't even like Thunderous EX, if I'm honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. It's just not particularly great. Now, moving into Psychic, there is a Natu with Delta Plus, which again, take an extra prize card if you KO your opponent's Pokemon with it. Now, it's again got 40 HP, and now 40 HP really is, it's the cutoff. Now, it's Latias EX. No, it's not. It's Latios EX. This is going to drive me crazy. Oh, can't remember which one's which. Latios EX is the one that you can do 40 damage on the first turn of the game, even if you go first. for one psychic energy, and it's gonna see play. People are gonna be playing around with it. Any deck that plays psychic energy is gonna be playing this, and honestly, I think pretty much any deck that plays rainbow energy should strongly consider playing this. We talked about it last week. This is for the hidden gems. So I'm not going to go too deep into it, but Natu having 40 HP is something you need to bear in mind. The other problem is, no, that's actually not true, because he's a psychic Pokemon and you've got Dimension Valley. I was going to say that having 2 energy to attack sucks, but he doesn't. If you're playing a psychic deck and if you've got Dimension Valley, I think Natu is a one-off. Yeah, it sucks that you're having to put a 40 HP basic in there, but in the same way Latios should be a one-of in any psychic deck now, at least, Natu should as well. Now, he does 10 damage times the amount of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. And the way the game is at the moment, you're going to be doing 20 or 40 damage most of the time. Your Landorus is going to have 1 energy on. I suppose you could do 60 damage to a Rayquaza, which is going to have 3 energy on. But that's about the most you'll probably do the vast majority of the time. But in any psychic deck, you put Natu out there, you've got Dimension Valley, and what you're trying to do is set up KOs to kill him with Natu. Now, this means that they can Super Scoop up, or they can Max Potion, or they can go to the bench, forcing you to hit a Pokemon Catcher, Lysandra, etc. There's all kinds of ways around Natu. However, you can take an extra prize. So essentially, you put it in there as a one-of, and if you're ever in a situation where your opponent has got kind of 20, 40 HP left, and, you know, you can just try and take an extra prize of it. It's not ideal, but it's a fun little card to play around with, and it could it's a kind of thing you'll put in your deck, and maybe once or twice a tournament it'll win you a game, and you know, you'll have to decide if that's worth it or not. Now the Xatu I really don't like, but it's got a fun little attack for a colourless energy. Look at the top 5 cards of either player's deck and put them back on top of that deck in any order, that player's deck in any order, which could be kind of funky because, you know, if your opponent's drawing dead, you could look at the top 5 cards of their hand and make a deck and make sure they don't draw anything. I mean, we're really clutching at straws here, ladies and gentlemen, just so we're clear. Now, moving into Banette, might actually be the first of the competitions on Pokemon Shuffle that I actually win. It's the only one I haven't tried for. I tried with Lucario, just missed out. Tried with Blastoise, had to be in the top 10,000. I think I was 10,037 when it ended, or something ridiculous. But now I had one go just for fun, and I'm like 4,000, and it ends tomorrow, and I need to be in the top 10,000. If you don't play Pokemon Shuffle and don't know what I'm talking about, play Pokemon Shuffle. Moving into Banette, he's got 2 cards, and they're both moderately interesting. One has an ability, each Pokemon tool card in play has no effect, so that would indeed work from the bench. Whether it's worth putting a stage 1 in, I really don't know. Now, there is also a Banette with Delta Revolution, which means you can evolve, you know, on the first turn of the game or the turn he goes into play. And he's got Evolution Jammer. Now, this is interesting. It's an attack for 20 damage, and your opponent cannot play any Pokemon from his or her hand to evolve his or her Pokemon during his or her next turn. Now, remember, Wally gets around this, and most Stage 1 decks now are going to be playing Wally. But, for instance, Rayquaza. Now, don't get me wrong, regular Rayquaza is still doable here. But Banette could do 20 damage, 40 with a Muscle Band, as long as you're not also playing the other Banette to turn off Muscle Band. 20 with... There's 40 with a Muscle Band, and then what it does, essentially, you can do this on your first turn of the game. You can't obviously attack turn 1, but you can, go turn 1, and then you can use Delta Evolution to get him going, and then use Evolution Jammer to stop your opponent Mega Evolving. The big downside of that, of course, is that Mega Rayquaza also has Delta Evolution, and they're always going to have one turn before you can do this attack, because if you go first, you can evolve but not attack, and then they get a turn to evolve. And if you go second, then they've had a turn to evolve because they've got Delta Evolution. So, not actually something that's going to see play, because most evolution decks, especially Stage 1s, are going to be playing Wally. And, you know, Rayquaza's the one we really want to stop Mega Evolving, and they've got Delta Evolution. They're always going to have a turn to do it anyway. Now, speaking of psychic Pokemon that could be teched into a psychic deck. Now, when I say psychic deck, I mean things like, you know, the one which I've had fun playing around with, and I've heard other people really swear by, is essentially Mewtwo Wobbuffet. And with the amount of Shaman that's going to be running around, ladies and gentlemen, Mewtwo, Wobbuffet is going to be quite a powerful Pokemon. Not to mention the fact that if you've got a half-decent attack, Wobbuffet can come in and finish off. It does the amount of damage on it plus 10. So if you can do let's say for argument's sake, you can X-Ball for 80, then you're going to be coming in with Wobbuffet the next turn and hitting for 90 without Muscle Band or anything. So Deoxys is also a kind of fun card. Along with Latios, along with Natu, Deoxys is going to come in, and he's got 2 funky attacks. One for a colourless energy. If you go first, you can use this attack on your first turn, draw 2 cards. It's a fun little starter. If you go first, you've got something to do on turn 1, drawing an extra 2 cards. The other attack does 30 for a Psychic colourless, but again, if we assume that you've got Dimension Valley in play, then you're actually just talking about a Psychic. 30 damage. During your next turn, it does 90. And of course, if you keep using that, and this does get asked by newer players, it doesn't go 30, 90, 30, 90. As long as you used Overdrive Smash the previous turn, it does 90, 90, 90, 90, 90. Unfortunately, as always, if Deoxys were to go to the bench through a Lysandra play or something, then it would then be a different Pokemon. So I don't believe that would still count. It would essentially reset it. Hey-ho, what can you do? And that's Psychic. Nothing game-breaking, but I like Natu, I like Deoxys. They're interesting little cards. Moving into fighting, I'm afraid it's a fairly... there's nothing I like in fighting at all. There's a Hawlucha that I really like the art, kind of flying through a city looking like a bit of a boy, but nothing particularly interesting. There are only 2 dark Pokemon. One of them's an Inkay. There we go. But the other one's an Absol, and this one's interesting to me because of the ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may move 3 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of his or her Pokemon. It's kind of like a basic and very restricted version of Dusknoir's Cursed Hand, is it? The one that allows you to just move the damage counters around at will. It will allow you to finish off Pokemon, and anyone that's played the game for a while will know that if you can take prizes in the middle of your turn, not only does it give you a card advantage because you get to draw an extra card that turn for your prizes, but it also forces your opponent into an uncomfortable position because they've got to put something else active, knowing that you can attack. So if you take a KO at the end of your turn, your opponent can put something active that they want to use next turn. If you take a KO mid-turn, your opponent's got to put something active knowing that you can then attack it. So they can't just put something active that they want to use next turn, because if they do, then you're going to get a free hit on it. But if they put something else active, they're going to have to be able to get that to the bench to follow, on their turn so they can get what they want active. So they've got a choice between having to play around to get what they want active or allowing you to hit the card that that they want to use next turn. So Absol really is quite an interesting card in that respect. It's really quite fun. I love that choice of, basically saying to your opponent, either you're going to put yourself in an awkward position by not having what you want active, or you're going to put what you want active and I'm going to get a free shot at it. It's not going to see a huge amount of play. I think people are hyping it a little bit too much. I've seen a lot of people get excited about this card, and I don't think it's all that exciting. I don't think it's one that people are really going to see a huge amount of use of. I think people are getting a little bit too excited about it. But I do think it will see play, and I think some people will make a fun little deck with it. You're not going to fill your bench with basic Pokemon just to move 30 damage. The attack is essentially garbage. 30 damage for 2 energy is not good, just so we're clear. Because Baby Yveltal does 30 damage for 1 energy, has a resistance to fighting, which is very much more useful than a resistance to psychic, at least in the format as it is at the moment. This could all change before these cards are rotated, of course. And it's got more HP, and it attaches energy to the bench. So you're never going to want Absol for attacking. And you're not going to put 4 of these and put 4 of them on your bench to move some damage around. What's going to happen is it's going to be played with Super Scoop Up Cyclone, etc. Cards that allow you to pick your Pokemon up. And it's going to be played to essentially... It's going to be played as a bit of a tech to screw over your opponent. Either to put your opponent's active Pokemon in KO range, or to, move some damage to a Pokemon to get a KO in the middle of a turn. Interesting, but not the be-all and end-all. I think people have got too excited about this since it was leaked. Now, the other thing that must be borne in mind is this is turned off by Wobbuffet and by Silent Labs, the stadium, and, of course, Garbodor, so something to bear in mind. Now, the only metal Pokemon in the set is a Jirachi with Doom Desire. Discard all energy attached to this Pokemon. The defending Pokemon is knocked out at the end of your opponent's next turn. We've seen loads of these as we go through. I think there was a Beedrill not too long ago that had this kind of attack. Your opponent's just going to retreat or switch out of it. Don't worry about it. Going into Fairy, and the first thing about Fairy is that I'm going to go back to the Togekiss thing. I'm going to try not to dwell on this because I've talked about this Togekiss a lot. So I probably shouldn't get too deep into it. But oh my goodness, I get frustrated by this Togekiss. It's got Delta Revolution, so you can evolve it from a Togetic straight away. You can put Togetic down and immediately go Togekiss. And, I mean, the attack's garbage, ignore the attack. But it's got an amazing ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may look at the top 8 cards of your deck, choose any basic energy cards you find there, and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. Brilliant energy acceleration for any deck, as long as they're not entirely or predominantly relying upon special energy. It's wonderful. But you don't want to use a stage 2 for this. However, if it's a stage 2 that you can evolve straight up, now we're talking. And it really frustrates me that you've got the Banette with Delta Revolution, you can evolve him straight away. The Mega Rayquaza with Delta Revolution, you can evolve him straight away. Togekiss with Delta Revolution, well, there isn't a Togetic with Delta Revolution. So you've got to have your Togepi down, and then next turn you can go Togetic Togekiss. But you can't go straight up. Now, of course, there is a way around this, and the way around it is, and a lot of people have pointed this out, and I thank you for doing so. You go Togepi, use Wally to evolve, and you can use Wally to evolve a basic into a stage 1 the turn it goes down, and then you use Delta Revolution on Togekiss. But that is an half a lot more awkward to get going. And you're using your supporter for the turn. Now, yes, I am fully aware that your supporter for the turn is not as important as it used to be now that we've got Shaman in the format. But one thing people are going to find very, very quickly as we get into this new format is that if you're overly reliant upon Shaman to set up, those Shaman are going down and you're going to end up losing games because Shaman goes down. Now, while we're on this little tangent, 2 things about Shaman. If you just recklessly bench Shaman all game, you are going to lose games because your opponent picked the Shaman off the bench. Also, if you're one of those players that's constantly picking Shaman off the bench, bear in mind you are taking down your opponent's support Pokemon. You're taking 2 prizes, but you're not weakening their board position. That Shaman has done its job and is essentially taking up a bench space. Your opponent might then be knocking out your active Pokemon, which is your attacker, which has got energy, which you've used resources to get into play. And they are going to win that war of attrition. So let's say you're playing against a Rayquaza deck. And let's say you're playing a Mega Manectric deck. You can do 110 damage with Mega Manectric. Brilliant. So, even if let's say they've got an Altaria down, so they've turned off weakness. You drag up their Shaman, do 110 damage, take 2 prizes. Their Rayquaza knocks out your Manectric and takes 2 prizes. Well, you've now got to try and get another Mega Manectric going with 2 energy. And, of course, you can Mega Manectric when it attaches energy to the bench. But you've got to get a steady stream of Manectrics, leave them down for a turn, and then use your Spirit Link to Mega Evolve them. And while you're knocking out Shamans and having to replenish your Mega Manectric, your opponent is sitting there chuckling because they are always going to have an attacker. They need to do nothing on their turn because they've got a Rayquaza there doing enough damage already. So they are going to get the KO every turn, while you're fighting to get Manectrics out to do the KO every turn. Not to mention the fact you're going to have to use Lysandra every turn to get a KO. So do bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that Shaman should not be played willy-nilly. Your opponent can pick it off the bench. And also that if you're only taking down Shamans, you're not weakening your opponent's board position. Going back to Togekiss, this would make so many more things viable in the format at the moment. And it's just not. And this upsets me. I wish there was a Togekiss with Delta Evolution. I would love this card. All these cards like Primal Kyogre, Primal Groudon that were too expensive before would now become awesome. As a quick side note, Mega Turbo, the trainer card that I mentioned last week, so a couple people got in touch with me to say, why didn't I mention the Primal Evolutions? Because I've talked in the past about Kyogre and Groudon being too expensive, and Mega Turbo will indeed work with Kyogre and Groudon. Something to point out, although they are Primal Evolutions, if you look at the cards, it makes it quite clear they are counted in the game as Mega Evolutions. The reason I didn't mention them, purely because I was just giving a few examples. I wasn't trying to give you an exhaustive list. I thought I said that. But absolutely, those people that were getting in touch with me, yeah, I agree entirely. I think Mega Turbo is going to make Groudon much, much better. And I think people are going to continue to play Groudon, but I think putting a bunch of Mega Turbo in your deck is going to make Groudon much faster. Remember what we've said about Mega Groudon in the past. Getting the first Groudon out isn't, and you could see this if you go back to my YouTube channel, just search PTCG Radio on YouTube. You'll see a game with a Groudon, and I make the same point there. Getting the first Groudon out isn't a big deal. The problem is that Groudon is going to go down. Do you have the second Groudon? And Mega Turbo is going to make this a lot faster. Not to mention you can use the Zonda Trump card to keep using it. And you've got the Scorched Earth, I think it's called, the Stadium, which allows you to discard energy in order to draw cards. Oh, Mega Groudon is going to be a lot more fun. Maybe he is one of the best uses for Mega Turbo. Maybe I should have been more excited about him. But regardless, to those people that got in touch with me, yes, I absolutely agree. I wasn't trying to give you an exhaustive list last week, but you're absolutely correct. Kyogre and Groudon can use Mega Turbo and are possibly two of the best uses for it. Because something else that shouldn't be slept on, if you've got Kyogre and you've got Rough Seas out and you're healing 30 damage a turn, that, and you're doing a lot of damage to EXs, that's going to add up quickly. And remember that Kyogre does a lot of damage to EXs on the bench, and Shaman is an EX. You're taking down those Shamans quickly. Now I'm thinking if I was playing Nationals, I'd really want to play Kyogre or Groudon. Hey-ho. So anyway, getting back to, so we've had a few little tangents there. Getting back to the Fairy. There's a Carbink with an ability Dual Armor, which prevents any damage done to it on the bench. The problem is, it's garbage, so don't worry about it. Moving into Dragon, there are two Dragonites. There's a fun little Dragonite, the non-ancient trait one. It's got gorgeous artwork. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may heal all damage from one of your Pokemon. Kind of funky. Free max potion without discarding energy. It's got an attack for 80 damage for free energy. Flip 2 coins if both of them are heads. Your opponent's Pokemon is paralyzed. 25% chance of paralysis is quite funky, and with Double Dragon, that's now 2 energy. I don't think it's great, but I think it's a funky little card. More of a kind of, you play around with it at League, use it for newer players. I don't think it's going to take the top tables by storm. There is a Dragonite with Delta Plus, which allows you to take an extra prize card when you take a KO with Dragonite. The problem is, the first energy, the only, in fact, attack which does damage, does 150 for 5 energy. Now, bearing in mind, you can put a Muscle Band on that, and now you're doing 170 damage, or indeed you could use a Silver Bangle to hit an EX. Now you're one-hit KOing EXs for free prizes. The problem is, 5 energy. Even with Double Dragon energy, that's still 4 energy attachments. Now 3 of them are grass, so you could put that in a Virizion Genesect deck and put 3 grass and a Double Dragon on there, but then you can, it's going to be so much easier to use Genesect. It's got less HP. It's got 160, which is good for a Stage 2, but you're still talking a Stage 2, you're still talking 5 energy. It's an awful lot to put into one Pokemon, and I really don't think it's going to be particularly great. One interesting card that no one's going to play, which again has gorgeous artwork, Altaria. Now, it's not the one with Delta Evolution, which turns off the weakness, so no one's going to play it. But it's got an attack for 1 energy, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw a number of cards equal to number of bench Pokemon, i.e. it's a Colress. That could be up to 16 with the new stadium, but, it's a Colress. Just play Colress. Sorry about that. Now, there's a Salamence with free attacks, which is interesting because we very rarely see Pokemon with free attacks anymore. It does 60 damage for a fire energy, discard any stadium in play, and stadium wars are going to be big nowadays, ladies and gentlemen, so that could be interesting. 20 damage times the number of cards in your opponent's hands for a water double colourless. Bearing in mind, as with all of these dragon Pokemon, double dragon energy provides 2 of any type to a dragon Pokemon, is absolutely in play. And with people chorusing to 16, this could be quite useful. People are going to use Chorus now this new stadium's out, and I think Salamence could take advantage of that. Steam Blast, 170 damage, discard free energy for a fire, water, colourless. You can use double dragon energy. I quite like it. I think it's a little bit overpriced even with double dragon energy, and if you use 2 double dragon, remember you'll have to discard them both. But I quite like Salamence. You add a Muscle Band, it's doing 190. I don't think any of the attacks are great, and I don't think it's going to be the basis of a really strong deck. But, what you can do is, for instance, the first turn he's out, do 60 for 1 energy. The second turn he's out, you can then pop a double dragon on and do 20 times the number of damage your opponent's hand. And then the third turn, you can add a 4th energy and do 170. So I kind of like it. I kind of like Salamence. I don't think he's going to be great, but I think he's got interesting attacks. The only other 2 dragon Pokemon are the Rayquaza and Zekrom that we talked about a couple times already. But just as a quick mention, Reshiram, if he's active, allows you to attach a fire energy from your hand to one of your dragon Pokemon. Now this makes me love Salamence, because Salamence takes 4 energy to do 170. So what you can do is use Reshiram to do 1 attachment, and then you can do Double Dragon for another. Not to mention, you could, for instance, play around with switches and Floatstone to use 2 Reshiram and a Double Dragon energy, and you can have Salamence doing 170 damage every single turn. Now, just so we're clear, I don't think Salamence is going to be amazing, but I think if you wanted to make him amazing, or you wanted to give it your best damn shot, I think you should be using Reshiram. 4 Reshiram, 4 switch, few escape ropes, bunch of Floatstones, and then what you would basically do, and this would be a real pain in the neck, but you essentially just attack with Salamence, and every time you need energy, you just put Reshiram up. You don't ever need to use water energy. You can just use fire energy and Double Dragon. Now, the latter 2 attacks both take 1 water energy, but again, Double Dragon will do nicely. And you can kind of get him rolling here. I like this. Again, I don't think he's amazing, but I think he's interesting. I think he's pretty gosh darn cool. Now, on last week's podcast, actually no, let's quickly go through Zekrom. I don't like the attack. The attack is garbage. Reshiram is a tech that you use to build up dragon Pokemon. The annoying thing is you can't even use it. The Dragonite doesn't even work here, because Dragonite 1 colourless energy on the second attack, and Reshiram only adds fire. Zekrom then, he does 30 damage, and you can attach a card from the discard pile, an energy from the discard pile to him for 1 lightning, and then it does 100 for 4. I don't like Zekrom. He's underpowered. He's not very good. Now, last week, I confess, I used the full arts when I went through the EXs, and I forgot the Dragon Rayquaza and Mega Rayquaza. Now, full disclosure, I went through them when they were first announced, and I went through them again in the Japanese podcast. So we've talked about them, but just very, very quickly, the non-Mega EX does 30 for a double colourless, 130 for a fire, lightning colourless. You can use Reshiram and Double Dragon energy for this, but why would you? He's underpowered. The Mega Rayquaza is a dragon type. It does 300 damage, discarding 2 energy for a fire, lightning colourless. Now, this could work with Reshiram in the same way I've just outlined with Salamence. Now, the lightning is used with Double Dragon, and you just use a Double Dragon and discard it. And essentially, you would try and be using, a minimum of 2 Reshiram per turn and Double Dragon. Get Mega Rayquaza up by turn 2. Now, he doesn't have Delta Evolution, he has Delta Wild, which reduces damage done by 20 if it's done by a grass, fire, water, or lightning Pokemon, which is kind of incredibly specific. Not as specific as the Hariyama, which came out a while ago, but still pretty gosh darn specific. It does 300 damage, but it's more awkward to set up than the other Mega Rayquaza, which also has Delta Evolution. Remember, this, of course, can use the same Spirit Link. as the other Rayquaza. But it doesn't have Delta Evolution. It doesn't attack for free energy, which can all be popped on one turn. So it's kind of annoying. But with Reshiram, switches, escape ropes, float stones, a bunch of fire energy, and let's not forget you can also use Mega Turbo. This is doable. Mega Rayquaza EX is doable. It takes 5 energy. Now, you ignore the lightning, you just pump it full of fire, and, you can get them in the discard quite easily with something like, and here you would use a stadium again, Scorched Earth to discard the fire energy, draw 2 extra cards, and the theory would be that you attach the fire energy with Reshiram from your hand, and from the discard pile with Mega Turbo, use Double Dragon energy, and essentially turn 1 you attach, because there's no Delta Evolution, and maybe even a second attach with Reshiram. And then on the second turn of the game, you just need another Reshiram and a Double Dragon energy. So, let's say you start Reshiram. Turn 1, you attach to Mega Rayquaza, and then you use Reshiram's ability to attach again. Remember, it would be turned off by Wobbuffet and Silent Lab. And then on turn 2, you use your Reshiram attachment, and then you use a double dragon energy, and you've actually got 5 energy on turn 2. You discard the double dragon, then the next turn you can do it again with a double dragon energy. If you need more energy, then you've got Mega Turbo extra Reshiram. The more I think about this, the more I really like this Rayquaza, maybe more than the other one. Now, admittedly, you can't get rid of the weakness, etc., and it's not quite so useful with, Shaman and the supporter, etc. It doesn't quite have the support network the other one does, and it takes 5 energy. But between Double Dragon and Reshiram and Mega Turbo, it's doable. I would like to see someone make a Dragon Mega Rayquaza deck with Reshiram. So not quite as quick as I intended, but we didn't go through it last week, so worth going through. Don't sleep on Dragon Mega Rayquaza, because there are many if you play against this deck, it's not going to be unusual for them to go turn 2, 300 damage, turn 3, 300 damage, turn 4, 300 damage, win. Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this could be pretty good. Now, going into colorless Pokemon, it's a bit slim pickings. There's a Skarmory that's got Call for Family, search for 2 basic, pop it on your bench. That's quite interesting. We have the Altaria, which takes away all the weakness from colorless Pokemon and has Delta Evolution. We've talked about him before. It's annoying. There's a Swellow with Delta Plus, which allows you to take an extra prize card, and it does 30 damage for a double colorless. Now, it is a stage 1, so I still prefer Natu, but as a kind of, you can pop it in any deck whatsoever. Natu, remember, takes a Psychic colorless, Swellow just a double colorless, so if you haven't got Psychic Energy and Dimension Valley, Natu's off the table. Swellow is the most, and we talked about this on the previous podcast where we went through him in the Japanese, when it was spoiled in Japan, when it was shown in Japan. Swellow is the most techable of these Delta Plus Pokemon. You can put a 1/1 line in, it works with double colorless. It's interesting, if not great. But the last Pokemon I really want to talk about is one which, and this is a very interesting one that flew completely under the radar, Unfezant. It's got Delta Evolution, which means you can evolve on the first turn of the game. But again, it's an Unfezant that evolves from a Tranquil. Tranquil evolves from Pidove. Pidove can't evolve into Tranquil turn 1 because Tranquil doesn't have Delta Evolution, but Unfezant does. Again, you can use Wally and then Delta Evolution. But seriously, you're making Stage 2s more and more unplayable. If you're going to give the Stage 1s Delta Evolution, if they don't have a Stage 2, give the Stage 1s Delta Evolution if you're giving them to the Stage 2. This is really annoying to me. Now, yeah, it's just annoying. Quit it. Just do it properly. It's annoying. But now this is something which I completely missed. It was I wish I'd taken note of the person who came up with this, because it's a wonderful idea which I had completely missed. So, Unfezant has an attack. The second attack, 120 for free energy if Flipper Tails does nothing. Let's just ignore that. We ain't touching that with a barge pole. The first attack, double colorless energy. During your turn, each of this Pokemon's attacks do 80 more damage. Okay. Not terribly interesting, because we don't want to use a second attack. But somebody pointed out Mew. We can use Mew to copy Feather Dance. We talked about Mew before. This is the Mew EX, which was in, I believe it came out in Dragons Exalted first of all, then reprinted in Legendary Treasures as part of the Radiant collection. Mew can copy Feather Dance so that next turn Mew's attacks do 80 more damage and Mew can copy anything. And there's a Spinder, which came out in Primal Clash, which for one colourless energy does 10 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, we don't have a ruling for this yet, but if it goes by previous rulings along this line, Zoroark, for instance, has done stuff like this in the past, it looks like this is actually going to do 90 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon. Now we're talking. You do that twice, you win. Now, as always, if you use Feather Dance with Mew and then your opponent, Lysandra, is summing up or uses an escape rope, Mew goes active. It's now counted as a different active Pokemon, and Feather Dance has effectively worn off. Bit of a pain. But if you can go Mew, and again, you'd have to go Wally and Delta Evolution here, but you can go Mew, you can have Unpheasant going on turn 1, you can use Feather Dance on turn 1, and then you can copy the Primal Clash's Spinder's Uproar on turn 2 of the game to do 90 damage to everything. That's awesome. That makes me happy. And again, the problem is that then you would have to use Feather Dance on your third turn, and Uproar on your fourth. I don't think it's going to be a good deck. You're relying on Mew, and it's not going to work. Continually, she's got 120 HP EX. If your opponent KOs a Mew or plays a Lysandra or an escape rope between Feather Dance and the attack, it's not going to work. It's not going to be a great deck. It might see no play whatsoever, but I love the idea of it. It's such an ingenious idea that as soon as I saw that, somebody posted it on the Facebook group Verbank City Gym. As soon as I saw that, I had to share it because I thought it was very, very interesting. The thing I like about Roaring Skies, we're done, by the way, in terms of new cards. The thing I like about Roaring Skies is that it opens up new decks. Yes, you got the colourless Rayquaza deck we've talked about ad nauseum. We get it. It's there. But we got that fun little deck I've just mentioned, which isn't going to be good. But then we've got the Dragon Mega Rayquaza, which you build in your Reshiram and your Mega Turbo and your Double Dragon, and all of a sudden this could start looking quite interesting. We got those new psychic Pokemon, the Deoxys, the Natu. Donk decks are potentially back with Latios EX. There are some really interesting little cards here, using Mew with Shedinja. I could see some of these decks being legitimately good. I could see a Mew Shedinja deck built consistently doing 170 damage basically every turn, starting on turn 2 of the game. I could see a Groudon or a Kyogre deck using Mega Turbo to get going and doing, both Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre have ridiculous attacks. I can see Mega Turbo getting going with them. I can see super consistent Manectric lists just hitting turn after turn after turn. I could see Mega Rayquaza, the Dragon version, with Reshiram, using Dragon Ascent on turn 2 of the game for 300 damage, and then every turn it's got 230 HP and a weakness to Fairy. It's going to, unless you're playing a Fairy deck, it's going to last a little while. So, there is some very interesting cards here. As always, my top 10 cards of Roaring Skies will be up my YouTube channel shortly. Apologies again that the Yeovil footage has been lost. I can't be mad at the boys. They provided me with the files from Nottingham Regionals, which were fantastic, and they're going to do so again at Nationals. UK Nationals is happening 3 weeks from this weekend. And I will be there, and I'll be working there, and I will be announcing and commentating over the stream. If you're in the UK, make sure you're at UK Nationals. Come and say hello, keep me company. If you are not in the UK, make sure you watch the stream. I will do my very best to make sure you know where it is, but it will clearly be posted on Verbank City Gym, so keep an eye on that over that weekend. I'll tweet it out if at all possible, so keep an eye on my Twitter over the weekend, although you should be checking it every day, to be honest with you. It may be more regularly. and then hopefully fun times are ahead. As always, you can catch me on Twitter at @TheWassy, and you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. Since I've started reading emails out, I've been getting more emails from listeners, and this makes me very happy indeed. Maybe I'll share a few of these in the coming weeks. Thank you to all of you that do email me. I assure you I do read all of my emails, and I try and reply to most of them, but it's not always so easy, but I do try where I can. And make sure you check out my YouTube channel, subscribe if you haven't already done so. I think that will about do it for this week. We're back to about an hour, but I'm not going to apologise for the length, because every time I apologise about the length, I get nobody complaining about the length, and I get people complaining that I'm complaining about the length. So I'm not going to. Thank you very much for listening, as always, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully I've given you some stuff to think about with Roaring Skies. Have a wonderful week until we meet again. Look after yourselves until then. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.